Welcome to this podcast on Inclusion in Action by Treasury Today and JP Morgan. Although Treasury has made huge strides in diversity and inclusion in the last 5 years, there is still much to do. Particularly since the pandemic, and the fact so many of us are now working from home, threatens to stall progress and requires a new proactive type of leadership and inclusion. In this podcast, you will hear how driving gender and ethnic diversity includes establishing mentor and sponsorship structures within Treasury, tying progress to managerial performance targets, and broad cultural acceptance within companies from the top down. Treasury Today's publisher and head of strategic content, Sophie Jackson, spoke to Alison Livesey, a managing director within wholesale payments at JP Morgan, Rosanna Somerville, manager global transaction banking and processes at Unilever, Simone Coultress, treasury manager Johnson Matthey, and Royston Da Costa, assistant group treasurer at Ferguson plc.
I'm going to be joined now for our first conversation, as I mentioned earlier, by Alison and by Rosanna. So I'm going to come first to Alison. Alison, we've spoken the other day, and you are an ex-barrister who's worked in compliance, amongst other areas, before your current role. Also, throughout the course of that journey that you've had, you've been very committed to this space around inclusion and diversity. So I want you to kick us off today and tell us why this has been something that's important to you and how that started for you in the work that you were doing.
Thanks so much for having me, Sophie, and a pleasure to be here with everyone. So I think, I started off in a profession within the investment banking compliance, which actually was broadly 50-50. So I think it was really kind of more when I started off, 20 years ago and went into those meetings, it was a realization, having come through university, come through law school, and set foot in some of those meetings, when I realized I was probably, a lone female. Heading into some of those meetings on the trading floors, met with, kind of very male environment, or heading into some of those management meetings. I suppose that was the first time I kind of realized that I felt a bit different and, was struggling to really look for kind of some of those role models. So I think there something sparked with me to kind of think about diversity and what part I could play. And I think it's really as I, became more senior in the organization, I realized I had a platform and a way to be able to drive diversity. And I have a passion for, kind of, as Laura said, creating an environment where people do feel like they belong. Diversity, as we know through many of the stats, drives a much, kind of better business case and much better business dynamics. And so I think it was, kind of some of my own observations about wanting to look for that role modeling and wanting to feel, kind of very included, kind of started me off on that journey. And then as I got to a place where I felt like I could influence, I wanted to use that. And also, if I'm honest, I've got to, to places in my career with, kind of real sponsorship from key people. And I think for me, there's also a component, which is that giving back. So, kind of giving back, bringing people along that journey and helping to drive that culture.
Rosanna, you and I were speaking recently, and I know that you had quite a revelation, if you like, after attending an event with JP Morgan back in 2018 around women in Treasury. When did you start to think about that in terms of senior level representation, your own career advancement? What was the moment when you thought differently about it, if you like?
No, maybe to start, I'm with Unilever Treasury for 25 years, and I fulfilled various roles within Treasury. And in the early years, there was no talk about diversity and inclusion. There was no awareness about this topic. Within my role, I've joined a lot of bank meetings. And even there, you could see that the woman representation was not that high, but still, it is what it is. There was no awareness. I would say, like what you mentioned, Sophie, was until 2018, actually, when I joined a Women in Treasury event on the Eurofinance, where I because it was my first Women in Treasury or Women networking event, where wanting two things which I realized. One is that I'm not the only one. There are other women out there that are struggling with the same issues. And then also at that day or that spot, it hit me that, wait a minute, in my 23 years at that time, it is the first time that we have a woman as a treasurer. And I didn't realize that because, again, you're so used to man-dominated stage. So I just accepted, like, okay. So it opened my eyes, saying, no, wow, this is the first time we have a woman as a treasurer, and also our global tax, which is really amazing. I would say within Unilever in 2010, we have put a lot of effort when it comes to diversity and inclusion. And one of the main targets was to have a 50-50 gender parity on management level. So we started the journey in 2010 where we had like 34% women on management level. And by end of 2019, we managed to hit the target of 50-50. And now we are like 51% on women in management level. We are not there yet because on senior executive level, it's still 35%, but we will get there.
Fabulous. And then you mentioned, coming to that event in 2018. Why do you think it's important to have these spaces that we have now with women in Treasury and with what we're doing today, to have a dedicated platform, if you like? Well, what's that meant for you?
Oh, that helped me a lot. Because of these kind of platforms, I'm participating. I'm a panelist now in this event. I would have never imagined, like 3 years ago, that I would do this. If somebody would ask me, I was like, okay, no way.
How do we start to think about measuring inclusion, and how can we have accountability for inclusion?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and something, certainly we've as a firm have been thinking about a huge amount globally, regionally, etc. I think for me, first of all, you've got to think about, what does inclusive leadership look like? So what are the attributes about what inclusion is? How do you treat others and fairness to others? How do you, think about fostering or creating an open environment? How do you think about teamwork? So I think, first off, we've all got to think about what are those elements about what inclusive leadership looks like, and how are we going to think about those, and what's, good versus, kind of not what we'd expect, and where we need to get to. And then I think you need to drive to accountability. And we probably all agree that, a great way to make people accountable is to put it in objectives, assess it at year end, and then tie it to performance. Ultimately, you'd hope that there's moral compass in there as well, but ultimately that's what drives it. And so I think it is those components. I think it's thinking about what that framework is. What does inclusive leadership look like? How are we going to assess it? And then having the rigor of assessing it. And one of the things that I'm passionate about is, you can assess it at the top level, and that's absolutely right, and management should be held accountable, but it's got to go throughout the organisation.
And, just as an addendum to that, what are some of the ways that we can actually measure it? What are some of the things that we're measuring when we hold people accountable for inclusivity?
Yeah, so I think it's, what feedback are you taking? Attrition rates. How well are we doing on exit interviews? So we're really understanding why people are leaving organisations. What is that 360 feedback and true 360 feedback? What are we hearing from people? What behaviours, what behaviours are people observing in a meeting? Where are we stepping up and giving that real-time feedback that maybe wasn't quite such an inclusive comment?
If you were speaking with yourself 25 years ago, entering into the workforce, what's some of the advice that you would give that woman?
I would say, first of all, don't be afraid to make mistakes, because often we are so afraid, and then we don't want to try new things. You just stay in your comfort zone. If you have the opportunity to work abroad, just do it, because you can learn a lot, get a lot of experience, exposed to new cultures and so on. One important thing, make sure that you have a development plan and stick to it, be disciplined, because those are the things that I kind of missed along the line. And get a mentor. Doesn't have to be someone in the company, even outside the company, somebody that guides you. But important it is, you are responsible for your own career and not somebody else.
I want us to come and speak with Simone and Royston, who I mentioned earlier. So Simone is Treasury Manager at Johnson Matthey, and Royston da Costa is Assistant Group Treasurer at Ferguson. So Simone, I want to come to you first. Tell me a little bit about your background. I mean, I know this already, but you started in the public sector, you transitioned across, and it's an interesting story. Tell us how you ended up in your role in Treasury.
So I studied accounting and management at university, and after uni I joined a local authority on their accounting and their graduate scheme. So it was a 3-year scheme, and the first year I spent in their capital and treasury team. After that placement, I spent the remaining 2 years working in various management accounting roles in internal audit. And after the 3-year scheme, I took a management accounting role. I really struggled with it. I struggled with the pace, and I struggled with really feeling that, wondering whether I was really adding value. So I decided to leave that local authority and join another one to see if it was any different. And I did, and it wasn't. So I decided at that point I would try and get into the private sector, and it was really difficult. It was really, really tough. I sent lots and lots of CVs, all these different jobs, different agencies, heard nothing. And, a recruiter said to me that it's unrealistic. You've got public sector experience, you have a public sector qualification. It's not going to happen, which was, fine. I got lucky. A role came up at Cadbury. They had just relocated from the centre of London out to Uxbridge. For those that are not from the UK, it's kind of very much on the outskirts of London, so it's a nightmare for anyone to get to. I was willing to do it. So I went to Cadbury and stayed there for a number of years. The Kraft takeover happened, so the Treasury was then outsourced. So I stayed for a couple of years there, and then got the job at Johnson Matthey, and have been here for 7 years. The first local authority I worked for, it was really diverse. It was in a part of London that was very diverse. So when I joined, the CFO was a black woman. We had several black managers, and those are the things that you notice. It makes you feel that, if you work hard and you're good enough, it is possible for you. And they had an employee resource group. It was called a Black Staff Forum, and it was very much about celebrating difference. There was an annual conference, and it was just like food and speakers, and it was really great, and it was really well regarded. And then at JM, I found it's very different. I know it's definitely not too dissimilar from a number of organisations where you have a lot of diversity in lower levels, and you move up, and that goes away. So a number of years ago, 2 years ago, they did a refresh of a D&I refresh, and I decided to try and launch an employee resource group. So I started a Black Employee Network. We launched in December 2018, and it was focused on the recruitment, retention and development of Black employees. And it's been amazing. It's been really great, and in particular with what we've seen this year with Black Lives Matter, we had the opportunity to meet with our CEO and talk about our some of the experiences of employees in the organisation. So it's been really great in terms of raising awareness and having providing a voice or an area where employees can feel safe and talk about their experiences.
Royston, I want to come to you now. You've supported us with Women in Treasury. You spoke a few years ago. There are a few men that are willing to sort of put themselves forward and speak in this space. What made you get involved, and what has that journey been like for you?
So thank you, Sophie, and appreciate the opportunity again to speak and share with your audience my journey. Look, like many of your audience and your speakers, August 2018, when I first participated in the panel discussion on diversity and inclusiveness, it's almost weird to say it, but the first thing I've got on my list was it was a business priority, and it should be for all companies today. It's almost kind of like, anyway, but that's key, I think, to mention. I think the second is personal, obviously, in terms of I have 2 daughters. One's 24, just completed a master's, and the other one just graduated at UCL. So for me, it's absolutely vital that they don't experience a world that I grew up in, or some of your other, delegates have experienced, and we know still to some degree exists today. It's only really 5 years ago that I feel this has become a topic that we begin to talk about within our Treasury departments and within our companies. It's quite staggering to think it's taken that long. But the good news is it's here. And you look at all the largest companies in the world, Google included, diversity is very much part of their journey. And then JP Morgan obviously have said that as well. The next thing I'd say is in terms of my involvement, it's also about increasing awareness. And I think finally, I'd say it's about choice. Wherever you work, whoever you are, there's no reason for you not to have the same choices that your peers have.
And what would your advice be for men who do support this, but who don't know how to help their female colleagues, or what they can be doing without getting in the way or taking up airtime?
What I would say is you've got to start where you are. So I think it also does depend to some degree in having that open and honest discussion. I think you have to be able to provide an environment where your team, your staff, your peers feel comfortable. So there's an element of where, if we're talking about Treasury, that you can do that potentially quite easily because you have control to some degree of that environment. I think it's also important to work in that, to have that your company sponsoring and fostering that inclusiveness, if you like, atmosphere. So that's obviously also very important. But I think you have to start where you are. I mean, in terms of what I said to myself is that I grew up in a family. I have 5 sisters, so I know it's not like I didn't have prejudices. Everyone has their prejudice, but to the degree to where I saw my sisters any worth any less than me in terms of how society perceived women, I don't think I've ever had that. So my experience, my upbringing, it's always been like, when we had this debate on diversity, as I said, 5 years ago, it began to become more mainstream. I kind of had to think twice about it. I think it is shocking that this is still going on. So I feel like even from a perspective of, if you're a man and you're in Treasury in particular, and you're asking yourself that question, you should be looking at it from a point of indignation almost.
Simone, I want to come back to you. Rosanna mentioned that earlier, that if she was speaking with her younger self, what she would say is find a mentor. I know that you haven't had a mentor or a sponsor yet, but I know it's that you think that these are very valuable tools. Tell us why you think they're important, particularly when it comes to leveling the playing field, as we're talking about.
Thinking about it personally, I think the way I was raised and the way I was told to behave in the workplace is very different to how I realise you need to behave to be successful. So I was always told to, be really quiet, keep your head down, just focus on work and keep your head down. And it's only after, a number of years that you realise actually that they're not the skills that typically are seen of leaders. You have to kind of have your head up, you have to be more, a bit more loud and a bit more confident. And so I think, having a mentor at the start would have probably been helpful. Someone to say, look, whatever your mum's told you, however you've been raised, scrap it, let's start again. And, take a risk, make a mistake, just speak up. And so I just think having a mentor, just giving some guidance as to how maybe to, try and perform in the workplace. You can't change who you are, you can't change your personality and character, but just recognizing that there are particular traits that are, rightly or wrongly associated with leaders. So that's why I feel like, I would have probably benefited, rather than kind of keeping my head down and hoping or thinking that someone was going to tap me on the shoulder and say, you're a leader, let's do something. It's just not happened.
Thank you to JP Morgan's Alison Livesey, Unilever's Rosanna Somerville, Johnson Matthey's Simone Coultress and Royston da Costa, Assistant Group Treasurer at Ferguson, for sharing their expertise. Listening to their personal experiences, it is clear Treasury is increasingly a place of diversity and inclusion that we mustn't let the pandemic and its far-reaching consequences damage. Thank you for listening. To hear more of our podcast episodes and to discover all our other audio content, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts from.